American rights! Damn you all, get back!
Hey, greetings, everyone. Lieutenant Colonel Alan West here, the Executive Director of the American Constitutional Rights Union and the ACRU Action Fund. And welcome to another episode of Live Free TV, brought to you by the American Constitutional Rights Union. You know, I just showed a video of, well, it was an incredible moment in my life. You know, you have these bucket list things that you get the opportunity to participate in. And, you know, like last year, going to Normandy, being there for the 80th anniversary of D-Day, that remembrance, and jumping out of C-47 aircraft that flew 80 years ago and landing on drop zones that our paratroopers landed upon. It wasn't, midnight, but it was still an incredible experience. And so April the 19th, 1775, the British were marching inland from Boston. Remember, wanted by land, to it by sea, Paul Revere, the night ride. They were marching inland toward Concord, Massachusetts, because they had the mission to destroy a weapons and armaments factory that was supplying the Sons of Liberty, the people that were standing up against them, standing up against the tyranny of Great Britain and King George III. But when they arrived at a place called Lexington, Massachusetts, and they were there on Lexington Green, the common area, they were met by 77, commanded by Captain Parker. 77 men who came out of their homes, came out of a nearby tavern to make a stand, because they did not want to cower to the tyranny. They wanted to let the British know that they were not going to surrender their common, as they were asked to lay down their weapons. But there was a greater meaning to that day. And so there I was, 250 years later, standing there in Lexington, Massachusetts, watching the reenactment of that event. The day that the shot was fired that was heard around the world that started the American Revolution. 8 of those men in Captain Parker's militia lost their lives that day, which enables us to be here in this great nation, the longest running constitutional republic that the world has ever known. And when I think about that day, on that day, there was no America. There was no Army, no Navy, no Marine Corps. There were just these men who came to make a stand. And I believe that is what we have to start thinking about in our great nation, is that America is greater than just some geographical boundaries and borders. It is an ideal, this idea of individual liberty, freedom, and rights, this idea of self-governance, this idea of the consent of governed, this idea that says that the individual is sovereign because their rights come from a sovereign God based upon the natural rights theory of John Locke, your life, your liberty, your property. That spirit is what enabled those men to take that field. And to also have had the honor to run in the Lexington Patriots 5-mile run that day. It was the 111th running of that race. And they only accept 1,000 people. So to be not just in Lexington, Massachusetts, to have watched the reenactment of an event that set this nation on its course 250 years ago, but now as a 64-year-old knucklehead to get to run around that hallowed ground. And as I came up on the finishing lap, and I've never seen a 5-mile run or any race course that I've ever done where it just seems to be uphill every single bit of the way. But the last 500, 600 meters that was uphill took me right past the Lexington Green, and took me right past that incredible statue of the Minuteman that I want to share with you right here. Standing beneath that statue with friends after I completed that run, it was a surreal experience, because right behind me is that little piece of green where those 77 made their stand. And then you get to go to other little monuments that are there and that depict the incredible bravery and courage that those men displayed. But the real irony of 250 years later is that the mission that the British had set forth to destroy the ability of those men to be able to stand and reject tyranny. Well, that mission is being completed in today's modern day Massachusetts, not by General Governor Gage, but by the current governor of the state of Massachusetts. See, that action that they took on that day, 250 years ago, April the 19th of 1775, well, that's the reason why we have the Second Amendment. The words are very clear. Well, to some. A well-regulated militia. First of all, regulated does not mean the ATF. It does not mean government regulation. Well-regulated meant, well, disciplined and trained. That's the words that the founders intended it to be. And when you listened to Captain Parker and the things that he was shouting out to keep his men in order, you understood that they had been drilling. They understood the orders. And the militia, remember what I said? In April the 19th of 1775, there was no America. So there was no American Army. There was no American Navy or Marine Corps. As a matter of fact, the Army was established in June of 1775, the Navy in October of 1775, the Marine Corps in November of 1775. The militia is just us, those who will come out and make a stand. So a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state. Those are the words of the Second Amendment. So it is the responsibility of that well-regulated militia to be there to secure their freedom and the free state in which they live, in which they reside, being it the respective state or the greater nation state that will come along, that will be called the United States of America. See, what they understood on that day is very simple. If you are armed as an individual, you're a citizen. If you're disarmed as an individual, you will be a subject. And that's why the last part of the Second Amendment, therefore, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But today, the state of Massachusetts is a state that has some of the most restrictive gun control laws in the United States of America. The complete antithesis of not just what happened on April the 19th of 1775, but also the constitutional right called the Second Amendment, which is in the United States Constitution, the Bill of Rights. So what should we do today? I found it very hypocritical that there were people there on that day, April the 19th of 2025, that were saying that America opposed a tyrant and a king then, and we do so now. I think you get what they were hinting at. See, I find it very perplexing that the progressive socialist left would all of a sudden believe that someone standing up for constitutional rights and freedoms and liberties, someone that stands up for the national sovereignty, someone that stands up for the rights and the safety and security of American citizens, that's tyrannical. It was so funny when there was someone that had a sign there in Lexington, one of these protesters from the left, that said, "No tax cuts without representation." And here we have come to a point where people don't want their money returned back to their pockets. They would rather live with the fraud, waste, and abuse that is being clearly evidenced by the Department of Government Efficiency. But again, when we talk about a tyrannical government, I would tend to believe that someone that is telling you how much toilet water you can flush, what type of shower head you can have in your home, what type of home you're allowed to buy, the means by which you can cook your food, meaning what type of stove you can have, the means by which you can wash your dishes, meaning what type of dishwasher you can have, the means by which you can heat or cool your home, the means by which you can drive from your home, in other words, what type of transportation or car you can have, or even, as Joe Biden and Karine Jean-Pierre once said, your children are not yours. They're ours. I think that's the pure definition of tyranny. But to those who believe in centralized government control, totalitarianism, despotism, dictatorships, autocratic means of governance, it's perfectly fine because they feel that they have the right to tell you how to live your life, or as the British would say, to grant you your buy and your leave. So the real lesson for me being there in Lexington, Massachusetts, 250 years later to the day, spending time there in that city, watching the people, understanding the atmosphere there in the state of Massachusetts. How is it that we have come to the point where we are allowing the British to achieve the objectives that they wanted? It just took them 250 years to do it. And furthermore, how did we allow it to happen? That our own brothers and sisters, our own brethren, so-called American citizens, would do exactly what the British wanted to do to us 250 years ago today. Thank God that these people that were there carrying around the placards talking about tyranny and supporting tyranny, really, they weren't alive back then. Because something tells me that if those same individuals who are in control of the government in the state of Massachusetts were around back in 1775, maybe there would not have been a stand at Lexington Green. And maybe we would be speaking the King's English, and I would not have a Southern accent. I might have a little bit different accent. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Live Free TV, because 250 years ago, on Lexington Green, April the 19th of 1775, they made a sacrifice so that we could live free. God bless you.